A hilltop in southeastern Turkey, a single carved pillar rising from the earth, older than anything we thought possible. In 1995, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating a site near the city of Sanliurfa and uncovered something that quietly broke every model of human development we had. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BCE, that is 11,600 years ago. Stonehenge dates to roughly 3000 BCE. The Egyptian pyramids to around 2500 BCE. Göbekli Tepe predates them both by more than 6,000 years. It was constructed before pottery, before the wheel, before metal tools, and before agriculture itself. At least 20 circular enclosures. Limestone pillars up to 18 feet tall, weighing as much as 50 tons, carved with a precision that challenges modern stonemasons working with modern equipment. According to everything we understood about how civilizations emerge, this site should not exist. For decades, it was treated as an anomaly. That interpretation did not survive closer examination. In 2020, Turkey launched the Taş Tepeler project, the most ambitious archaeological initiative the region had ever seen. 219 scientists from 36 institutions began mapping not one site but 12, spread across 150 kilometers of southeastern Anatolia. What they found was not an anomaly, it was a civilization. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan, Sefer Tepe, and at least 8 other major sites, all sharing the same T-shaped pillars, the same construction methods, the same carved symbols, the same everything. Researchers had spent 3 decades treating Göbekli Tepe as a solitary puzzle. The Taş Tepeler project revealed it was the ceremonial center of something far larger, a connected regional civilization that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. The symbol system is where the scale of this becomes difficult to absorb. Approximately 20 core pictographs appear consistently across every site in the network. These are not crude scratches or decorative flourishes. They are standardized symbols, carved the same way, positioned in similar contexts, repeated across hundreds of pillars spanning centuries of construction. Linguists call this a semasiography, not writing as we understand it, but a deliberate communication system nonetheless. What makes this remarkable is the consistency. The variation in symbol proportions across all 12 sites measures less than 6%. Communities potentially speaking different languages, separated by days of difficult travel through mountainous terrain, maintained identical symbolic conventions for approximately 800 years, longer than the entire history of the United States, longer than the Ottoman Empire lasted. That kind of consistency across that span of time and distance does not happen organically. It requires institutions. It requires training. It requires someone checking the work and correcting errors across dozens of generations. There had to be a system. There had to be people whose entire purpose was maintaining it. Think about what that means. Before a single city existed anywhere on Earth, before agriculture had fully taken hold, before any of the civilizations we study in school had drawn their first breath, a network of communities across 150 kilometers of difficult terrain was operating with the organizational sophistication of a functioning institution. Standardizing symbols, enforcing conventions, transmitting knowledge deliberately across centuries. Göbekli Tepe was not a solitary mystery. It was the ceremonial center of a connected regional civilization, and that civilization had been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. The symbols themselves are where the story gets difficult to dismiss. When researchers analyze the complete corpus of carvings across all 12 sites, patterns emerge that go far beyond shared iconography. Specific symbols paired together with a consistency that exceeds anything random artistic choice would produce. The snake and a particular H-shaped symbol cluster together 68% of the time on pillars where both appear. The scorpion almost never appears without at least one bird carved nearby. Snakes appear in groups of 3, 6, 9, or 12. Never odd numbers. Never. These are not coincidences. These are rules. Something close to syntax. The enclosures themselves appear to reflect this order at a communal level. Enclosure A is dominated by snakes, enclosure B by foxes, enclosure C by boar. Each community that gathered at the site from across the regional network had, it seems, its own emblematic animal, its own enclosure, its own designated place within a shared symbolic order. This was not a temple where everyone worshipped the same way. It was a structured system in which different groups held different roles, different identities, different positions within something larger than any one of them. Then there is Pillar 43. 47 distinct figures arranged in structured horizontal registers stacked like sentences on a page. The central vulture sits at the exact geometric midpoint of the entire composition, both horizontally and vertically. The V-shaped friezes are aligned to within 2 millimeters across a width of 90 centimeters. Someone planned this in full before a single chisel stroke was made. Researcher Martin Sweatman fed high-resolution images of this pillar into astronomical simulation software. The vulture aligned with Sagittarius, the scorpion with Scorpius. The reconstructed night sky pointed to approximately 12,800 years ago, corresponding to the Younger Dryas period, when geological evidence confirms a major climate disruption reshaped the planet. The German Archaeological Institute published a detailed rebuttal. Radiocarbon dates for the enclosure run at least 1,400 years younger than Sweatman's proposed date. Constellations, they note, are cultural constructs. Ancient peoples would not necessarily have grouped stars the way Greek astronomers later did. Both positions deserve consideration. The astronomical interpretation may be wrong, but the mathematical precision of the composition is not in dispute. Someone built a monument of extraordinary geometric exactness, populated it with symbols that follow grammatical rules, and oriented it toward the sky. Whatever they were saying it deliberately. Here is every civilization we have ever studied, rendered in a single pattern. The Egyptians built increasingly sophisticated pyramids as their techniques developed across centuries. Greek architecture grew more refined with each generation. Roman engineering became more ambitious decade by decade. Skill accumulates. Knowledge compounds. Ambition expands. That is how civilizations work. That is the only way we have ever seen them work. At Göbekli Tepe, it works in reverse. The earliest construction layers, dating to approximately 9,600 BCE, contain the largest pillars, the deepest undercut reliefs, and the most complex symbolic compositions found anywhere at the site. Layer 2, built 500 to 800 years later, shows smaller pillars, shallower carving, and simpler designs. By the final occupation phase, the work is comparatively crude. Imitations of earlier forms, executed by people who clearly could not match what their predecessors had achieved. The AI analysis quantified this precisely. In the earliest phase, symbol pairings follow the established co-occurrence rules 92% of the time. By the middle phase, that drops to 73%. In the final occupation period, it falls to 58%, barely above random chance. Within 800 years, a civilization went from rigorously maintaining complex symbolic conventions to barely remembering they existed. The quarrying tells the same story. The earliest builders used thermal shock fracturing, heating limestone to between 400 and 600 degrees Celsius, then applying cold water rapidly. The thermal stress caused fractures along predetermined lines, allowing precise separation of stone from bedrock. It required intimate knowledge of the material's internal structure, of how the stone would behave under extreme temperature change, of exactly where and when to apply the water. Later quarry sites show only crude pecking with hammerstones. The thermal technique vanishes from the archaeological record entirely within a few centuries of its first appearance. Here is what makes this detail the most difficult to explain away. There are no practice stones anywhere in the quarry fields, no failed attempts, No evidence of a learning curve at the beginning. The technique does not appear tentatively and then improve. It arrives fully formed, executes with extraordinary precision, and then slowly drains away across generations until it is gone entirely. That is not the pattern of invention, that is the pattern of inheritance. Which raises the question the title of this script is built around. If this knowledge was inherited rather than invented, the only remaining question is a simple one. Inherited from whom? Around 8000 BCE, something deliberate happened across the entire Taş Tepeler network. Every site was buried, not destroyed by conflict, not abandoned to gradual erosion, buried carefully, methodically, under thousands of tons of layered earth. The enclosures, the carved pillars, the symbolic compositions, all of it sealed underground with such precision that the structures survived virtually intact for 12,000 years. The burial was not an act of neglect. It was an act of engineering. Whoever performed this understood exactly what they were doing. They were not closing a temple. They were preserving one. The timing is what demands attention. The burial coincides precisely with the moment agriculture became fully established across the region. And according to every model of civilizational development we possess, this should have been a moment of acceleration. More reliable food means larger populations. Larger populations mean more specialized labor. More specialization means greater engineering ambition. That is how it worked in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley, in China. The agricultural revolution propels civilizations forward without exception. Here, at the exact moment it should have done the same, the builders sealed everything and walked away. For decades, that contradiction sat unanswered. Then the DNA evidence offered the most grounded explanation we have. Ancient genomes recovered from the nearby site of Göbekli Tepe, dating to approximately 8500 BCE, confirm that the populations of this region were the direct genetic ancestors of the Anatolian Neolithic farmers who migrated into Europe beginning around 7,000 years ago. Those migrants carried agriculture, domesticated animals, and the accumulated knowledge of their homeland across an entire continent. The builders did not vanish. They dispersed. The specialized knowledge that had been held and transmitted by trained practitioners across 12 sacred sites diluted across thousands of farming villages, scattered from Anatolia to the British Isles. The stonemasons became farmers. The ritual specialists became village elders. The thermal shock technique was forgotten within generations. The symbolic conventions that had been maintained with 92% precision at the height of the civilization dissolved into folklore. Then silence. Not catastrophe. Transformation. And in that transformation, something was lost that took 12,000 years to find again. The people survived. The knowledge did not. And the difference between those two outcomes is the entire distance between a civilization that builds monuments to last forever and one that eventually has to dig them back up just to know they existed. The evidence from Göbekli Tepe confirms one sophisticated pre-agricultural civilization that rose, peaked, watched its own knowledge degrade, and deliberately preserved what remained before dispersing into the world that came after. The broader claim, that this pattern has repeated 5 times, cannot be proven from a single site, but the converging threads are difficult to dismiss individually and harder still to dismiss together. The Younger Dryas impact event. The recurring archaeological signatures of abrupt population collapse at multiple points before recorded history. The Sumerian king list encoding civilizational cycles in mythological language across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. The pattern is always the same. Sophistication, concentration, disruption, fragmentation, myth. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not the first to face this moment. They carved what mattered into stone because they understood that. The 6th civilization is us. The question is whether we are paying attention.